The culture of food is so very layered, particularly when it comes to recipes that are attached to or associated with a geographical location. Histories, both official and hidden, play out in such dishes, carrying traces of migration, commerce, taste, and media. And then when you're talking about dessert bars, there are even more layers: the crust, the filling, the icing, the nuts. Thank you for layering in a little time to your day and making some ear space for Digesting Food Studies, the podcast that revels in all things cookie, cake, bar, and petit four. I'm your man with the offset spatula and piping bag, David Santo. This episode takes a turn to the sweet side of food studies, with an exploration of that humble, pervasive, and also very divisive little square known as the Nanaimo Bar. As you'll hear from our guest author, the Nanaimo Bar is part of that dessert category known as Populux dainties, a verbal mouthful in itself. But it also raises questions about the taste of place, of food origins and namings, of colonialism and authenticity. The article in focus, Notes from the Nanaimo Bar Trail, comes from the debut issue of Canadian Food Studies, Volume 1, Issue 1, published all the way back in May 2014. Shifting things geographically from British Columbia to France, Alexia Moyer starts us off with an amuse-bouche that should indeed tempt your taste buds. Exploring a form of pâtisserie that takes its name from a well-known bicycling competition, she notes how some place-based foods draw on more nature-based influences, while others are more symbolic of socioculture. Following up on this theme, Lenore Newman walks us through the Nanaimo Bar Trail, and the making of a research article that may seem straightforward but actually delves into several complex food studies themes. Plus, it's about dessert. And then, rounding things out, master student Julia Mitchell reflects on the ways that folklore and fake lore both come to have effects on what we, in air quotes, know to be true about our favorite foods. And yes, Julia does manage to touch on poutine as well. Squeak, squeak, squeak! Good day, Alexia. How are you today?
Good day, David.
What have you got for us?
A dessert.
A dessert, my favorite.
So the question is, have you ever had a Paris-Brest?
I don't think I have, but I see them all the time in my local patisserie.
Yes, they make them in mine too. I like them. It's made of choux pastry, as you know. It's an incredibly versatile pastry. It becomes hollow when it's cooked, so you can fill them with virtually anything, including tuna or tuna salad if you wanted to.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, it's pretty good actually. For this particular dessert, the pastry is a circular shape, so rather like a wheel. This is the clue,
okay,
by the way, as to its origin story. And it's filled with a praliné cream, and it's liberally scattered with flaked almonds. It's very light. It's very sweet. I tend to buy it rather than make it because the bakery down the street does it to a much higher standard than what can be produced in our kitchen. But what I wanted to focus on just now is not so much the ingredients or the taste, but rather the name. Paris-Brest. It's two place names.
Yes.
So Paris is Paris. It's the one in France. And Brest is a city on the western tip of the department of Finistère and Brittany, France. So Paris-Brest is a dessert, but it's also a long-distance cycling event dating back to the late 19th century.
Yes.
Where cyclists leave from Paris, they arrive in Brest, and then they go back to Paris. So it's 1,200 kilometers in all, which is about the amount of cycling needed to burn off the calories from the cream center.
It's very practical dessert and racing competition.
Yeah, 2 in 1. So the shape of the dessert is a nod, as well as the name itself, to the event. And it provides a way of thinking about place-based desserts.
Okay.
Now, there are a number of ways in which place and food are linked, procedurally and culturally and rhetorically. And the one that comes to mind is really terroir.
Yes, the wonderful, wonderful world of terroir. when I was doing my master's degree, we used to call people who are a little too obsessed with terroir, terroiriste.
I feel like that's appropriate. So we associate it nowadays to winemaking, but if we go back, it really refers to the soil, la terre, the earth. And in modern parlance, we take it beyond winemaking even to include foods that are of an inimitable geographical area.
Yeah, cheeses sometimes get talked about with terroir. And more recently, I've heard that maple, particularly in Vermont, is being associated with terroir. Amy Trubeck does some great work on that.
Oh, yes. That's right. Okay, yes. But sometimes place names associated with foods and dishes are purely incidental. And this is the interesting part for me. So Elizabeth Driver wrote I think we can say, seminal biography of Canadian cookbooks, or bibliography of Canadian cookbooks. She compiled a master list of cookbooks published in Canada between 1825 and 1949. And she spent a lot of time with these cookbooks, and she began to notice patterns. And one such pattern is articulated in an article about the regional differences in the Canadian daily meal. And it's in the book What's to Eat? Entrees in Canadian Food History.
Ah, yes, okay.
So the pattern in question is that of Canadian place names. In this earlier batch of cookbooks, they don't always have much to do with the recipes that they are paired with. And she writes, when searching the recipe origins, one must be wary of reading too much meaning into recipes with a Canadian place name. Manitoba pudding in the Quebec City book is very similar to Montreal pudding in the Toronto book.
Well, they're M puddings, obviously.
Muskoka chocolate cake in the Toronto book is not the same as the Muskoka cake in the Victoria book, which contains no chocolate. And I have yet to find a text published in Manitoba, Montreal, or Muskoka where the local inhabitants identified these recipes as their own. So, sometimes food and place are inextricably linked, like terroir, and sometimes they are incidental, and sometimes they lie somewhere in between.
Like perhaps the example of our wonderful Nanaimo Bar in this episode?
The Nanaimo Bar,
yes.
Exactly. That's the in-between place where we might situate it. Now, the list of ingredients are not necessarily unique to that part of the world. Let's go through them. White sugar, confectioner's sugar, cocoa, vanilla custard powder, chocolate baking squares, graham cracker crumbs, and dried coconut.
It sounds all terribly colonial.
Yes. But the city of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island has laid claim to the squares, and it has played a substantial role in ensuring the longevity and widespread popularity of its eponymous dessert. From a mayor-initiated competition to determine the ultimate Nanaimo bar, to a place in the Nanaimo Museum, to the current Nanaimo Bar Trail map featuring local eateries that make, sell, and deconstruct the bar.
Yes, which Lenore talks about later on in our interview.
Yes. So that Nanaimo and its chocolate coconut custard square are deeply enmeshed. So this is a very small sample of desserts. This is an amuse-bouche after all, but hopefully gets us thinking about some of the ways in which we eat places.
Yeah, and think about also how place names also sometimes change and leave their dessert behind. The thing I love about the Nanaimo Bar is that, well, one, Nanaimo is so badly pronounced outside of Canada. And two, it is so sickly sweet and kind of good, but kind of gross. It's like eating a Snickers bar dipped in custard sauce or something like that.
I always think I'm going to like a Nanaimo bar. It looks beautiful, especially that custard center, but I don't.
No. Well, I think you are among a large majority of Canadians. Anyway, we will dive into the sweet goodness in a little while. And thanks for this foregrounding of what we will be putting in our mouths and in our minds in a little while.
You are most welcome.
Lenore Newman is a professor in the Department of Planning, Geography, and Environmental Studies at the University of the Fraser Valley, as well as director of its Food and Agriculture Institute. She specializes in agricultural innovation and policy, while also managing to squeeze in writing time for stories of food culture and identity, including in her 2017 book, Speaking in Cod Tongues. So, Lenore, thank you for joining us on Digesting Food Studies. We are diving back into the past for this conversation with an article that appears in the very first issue of Canadian Food Studies. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, great to be here today.
This is a particularly special episode for me because this article that you wrote, Notes from the Nanaimo Bar Trail, was actually the first article I ever edited for the journal. So I have a personal attachment to this, but I also use it in teaching right now. And I think it's one of the reasons that I like it so much is it really connects history and folklore and the lived experience of today through this wonderful object, the Nanaimo Bar. How did you come to write this piece? What is this about for you?
Well, it's a great example about how you just never know what little research corners are going to have real longevity in your work. And the Nanaimo bar was actually not on my radar. I mean, I'd eat a few of them, but I had a student who got very curious about the history of the Nanaimo bar. And he wanted to go into a career as an archivist. And I was like, well, why don't you dig into it and see what you can find? Because the Nanaimo bar is quite well known out here in British Columbia.
Sure.
And at the time was this ongoing question of, was it really British Columbian? Was it really from Nanaimo? And so I said, look, go see what you can find. It's a great research project. We'll put a little money on it. And he became probably one of the experts on 1950s cooking in rural Canada. And we ended up, number one, solving the mystery. Largely, it is from Nanaimo, as we say in the article, finding the first appearances of the recipe, and also assembling probably the second largest collection of small cookbooks, community cookbooks in Canada, only bested by the one at Guelph put together by Anita Stewart. And he did go on to an archival career.
Fantastic.
And also, I was talking to him a while back. He's like, yeah, I still occasionally make like Nanaimo bars and Jell-O salad and all these things. And we ended up doing a lot of interviews on it. The Nanaimo bar just had legs, and it keeps coming back again and again. And it's such a surprise because I really thought it was a one-off student project. And here we are all these years later.
Still talking about it.
And still talking about Nanaimo bars.
Well, it's such a wonderful, divisive and unifying object, the Nanaimo bar. I mean, it is, by some accounts, revolting, overly sweet, highly industrialized. And then by other accounts is this incredible marker of Canadian history, or, whatever we want to call Canadian history, the sort of evolution of colonial history into West Coast, in this case, food culture. And it continues to live and thrive. And, the corner store right next to my house sells prepackaged Nanaimo bars, like here in the Eastern-ish Canada. And so that too is also a marker of its unification capacity, but also its perpetualness. It's the ways that it thrives and survives in so many different environments. When you were doing the research, when you were writing the article, in fact, when you get into quite a lot of history, quite a lot of archival material, but then also the contemporary ways that we understand relatively recent food traditions, things like green bean casserole, which Lucy Long has written brilliantly about, the ways that new recipes sometimes aren't that new, but that they become part of heritage. Because I know you've written a lot about different parts of Canadian food culture. Is that something that you continue to find interesting?
Yeah, I really do. And it's so true. I think what I love about it is how local and how personal food remains, even in an age of a global food system. And of course, a lot of the quote unquote day job work I do these days is on the global food system and on trade and on technology. But I'm still really drawn to that personal element and how it can be ridiculously local. I just returned from a trip to Europe. I was actually in Finland, which is where my family comes from. And we were in the city of Tampere, and there's this donut they make. And it's weirdly famous only there. It's a cake donut, kind of cinnamon, cardamom. Cardamom's a big Finnish flavor. My grandmother used to cook with cardamom.
Sure, yeah.
And these donuts just were suddenly part of my life for a week. And I ate way too many of them because they were really good. And then, of course, got on the train, went to Helsinki, and the donuts were gone. And I'm like, it's so weird. It's so local. And we still see that all over the world, these local foods constantly emerging, fading in and out of favor, and argued over and loved. I've always said that cuisine is a language, and it's such a rich language.
Yeah.
And it diverges the same way a language does, in which it creates these little pockets. I've actually recently started to shift a bit back to there, in that I'm working on a new book project that is largely drawing on that. Again, these deep emotional connections to flavor, especially in an age where food is so political.
And one of the things that I love with this piece is the ways that you bring in notions like that, like food as a language. But one of the terms that I discovered in your text was populux, this idea that a dainty, a small sweet treat, a bar or a square could also be considered both luxurious and popular. Can you tell us more about this idea of populux food? Because I think that sounds a little bit like the donuts you were just mentioning in Finland.
It is such a neat idea in that I feel there's a great nostalgia now, especially in the current political climate and the current sort of ongoing global crises of pretty well whatever flavor you want. There was something so aspirational about that post-war period and these populux products where it was kind of very, very low-grade luxury where you had these supermarket products put together, but there were things you couldn't get 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, in times of rationing, in times of the World War. Suddenly, butter and sugar were available to show off a bit. And it reminds me a bit of the design of the 1950s and the architecture. One of my other little passions is the Googie architecture school of Los Angeles and California in general. This almost space age, aspirational rocket to the moon kind of architecture. And the truth, of course, is that past never really existed, at least not for everyone. I mean, it was a deeply sexist and racist time, and there were a lot of problems. But there is something a little nostalgic about the idea of these small communities where everyone, well, a certain subset of everyone was suddenly working these jobs that paid for a house, paid for a college education, where you could aspire that your children would actually have more than you do. And it does seem to be a bit of a golden age. And these little squares were part of that. They were part of the whole display, and they were just sugar and fat pressed into a bar. But
newly affordable sugar and fat. Yeah.
Newly affordable, and they were a luxury. They were an affordable luxury that was easy to put together. And I think populux does also bring in that convenience. That element that, hey, you don't have to go churn butter anymore. We're done with that. We're done with churning butter, at least for a little while. And you can just buy it in the store.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Coming back to what you were just saying about sort of the political shifts, and there, that was a very political time, post-World War II. Do you see in this era of bizarre politics and political upheaval, we're not in a very hopeful or aspirational time. We're probably in the opposite of that. Is there a food that might be an equivalent to the Nanaimo bar for today's era of polycrisis?
That is a great question. And I almost feel we're not quite there yet. And I almost hate to imagine, which direction it's going to go. I think we're deep in it. I think historians looking back will have a lot to say about this period. It's starting to look like the decline of the West, the rise of the East, and these messy problems that can't be solved. And one thing that caught me recently was this term emerging in the UK, enshittification. The idea that life is both somehow expensive and crappy at the same time.
Right.
And I almost think that at this exact moment, the food that encapsulates that is somehow the fast food is expensive, but still terrible. And I kind of think of like a squished hamburger that somehow costs $20.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm hopeful that there is a golden future past this, that like the 1950s and 60s return again after this terrible time. But right now, everything is slightly smaller, slightly more expensive, slightly lower quality, and we're stumbling through that period. And yeah, that enshittification of the world is upon us.
Crossing over into our foods. I mean, I sort of think about things like inexpensive comfort food and tin sardines and, granola bars that will last forever in our bomb shelters as being the food of this era. But I think that's a little bit too grim.
Yes.
We'll see what happens. I do like the idea of the very expensive, crappy burger that's been squished flat.
I almost feel like airline food is like capturing this era very well. That's a little grim.
Yeah, it's a bit grim. Well, on that note, let's hope that one of our listeners will come up with a parallel expression to Populux that describes the crap that we're eating that's too expensive and not very good. Anyway, thank you so much for diving back into the history of our archives and thinking about a happier day of Nanaimo bars. It's been really fun talking.
Oh, glad to. And there is a little bakery near my house that makes a very good Nanaimo bar. They actually call it a Nanaimo street bar because they're on Nanaimo Street.
Ooh.
And it's very classic, and I might have to have one today in honor of this conversation.
And I'm going to pop out to my corner store to buy one of the little pre-wrapped ones that I can get for 80 cents. Thanks, Lenore.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Julia Mitchell is a master's student in arts and communication at Carleton University, exploring the use of French terminology on English language menus. They're also interested in podcasting and using hope and optimism to promote food systems transformation.
Hello. My name is Julia Mitchell, and I'm in the second year of my Master of Arts in Communication at Carleton University. I'm currently using menu analysis as a framework for understanding the phenomenon menu French and how, or whether, Canada's colonial legacies continue to appear on Anglophone menus in Ontario. Essentially, I want to identify some of the ways that French gastronomy and colonialism reproduce conditions for the phenomenon menu French. As such, the notes from the Nanaimo Bar Trail was a really intriguing read for me. I found how capitalism could be seen as integral to the Nanaimo Bar particularly fascinating. The ingredients themselves are branded, commercially produced, shelf-stable, and ready to use. So, if cuisines do reflect the dominant ideologies of the societies where they originate, what could we infer from the generational shift of associating the Nanaimo Bar with Costco instead of a church supper or social gathering? Furthermore, is menu French merely an extension of this, where one language is used to help better brand said food item and thus increase the price and profits? I've also realized that I've been considering menu French as separate from the items on the menu, and this piece had me reconsider the importance of the actual menu items themselves. Meaning, is there significance in steak frites appearing in French when French onion soup appears in English? Is there something in the history of these dishes that might indicate how or why one language is selected over the other? The investigation into the history of food dishes is also complicated by folklore. So this was a new idea for me. I knew that food creates strong memories intuitively, as most of my memories hinge on the food that I was eating at the time, but I hadn't considered the potential of a fictional past. It would be interesting to see the origin of popular foods challenged and see how true in fact they are. It would also be interesting to see how other Canadian dishes such as poutine compare to the Nanaimo Bar in terms of how they became popular. For example, the website Visit Quebec has a poutine tour of Quebec, which could make for an excellent follow-up piece. Incidentally, about a decade ago, I did look into the origin of poutine online and found an article claiming that it was a regular at a restaurant in Quebec who was the inventor. Allegedly, he was a trucker that would go to a specific restaurant that sold St. Albert's curds and served fries with a side of gravy. He was credited with mixing everything together and creating the poutine. However, now I can't find that specific article anymore, and the Canadian Encyclopedia.ca has two different competing accounts of how poutine came to be. Is the original article that I had found folklore created by St. Albert's? Is there any truth to the origins listed on the Canadian Encyclopedia? Lenore Newman's article has provided an excellent template for future scholars to investigate other regional dishes, such as poutine. The article's methods were quite revealing and thorough in terms of the archival research and targeted interviews, and the use of oral history to verify and guide the archival research was brilliant. Hopefully more scholars can incorporate these methods into their studies, and someone can finally give me closure on the origins of poutine.
Where certain foods come from is a perennial source of interest and inspiration for eaters and scholars and journalists. Somehow tracing a dish or a recipe to a unique point of origin seems important, or at least a mystery that can be unraveled. But that tends to smack of an overly linear and causality-based understanding of food culture. Like all histories, what we believe to be true is generally a case of what documents were and remain most successfully published, as well as the perceived authority of the creators of those documents. Nonetheless, food, like humanity, is constantly evolving, a layering of one past on top of another and another and another. Like poutine and the Nanaimo Bar, we can often identify where or when a dish gets its name, but the culinary iterations that led to it, those are much more fluid. As they say, menus and cookbooks are written by the victors. Or is that, written by the victualists? Thank you so much to our tampers of crumb crusts and spreaders of custardy fillings, Alexia Moyer, Lenore Newman, and Julia Mitchell. Your insights are much more than half-baked. Particular thanks to Zélie Scherer for her support as audio technician and consultant, and to the Digesting Food Studies executive producers, Rachel Engler-Stringer, Laurence Godin, Charles Levko, Phil Loring, and Kristen Lowett. I will always share my date squares with you. I'm David Santo. Please do take a moment to appreciate our show and click on a like or recommend button when you're done listening. It really helps a lot to spread our sweet stories. You can also check out the show notes for links and to learn more about the sound and music that liven things up and give you a break from my voice. Authenticity, like food origins, is a hotly debated theme in food studies. Lisa Helke, the always thoughtful philosopher of food, has described our search for authenticity as a pursuit of the exotic other, an attempt to know the context not of ourselves, but of that which is perpetually beyond our ken. Appreciating the other is great, but do we really need to occupy their experiences? It's a rather blurry question. So the next time you seek out an authentic food moment, ask yourself this: authentic to whom? And to what time and place?